Welcome, my friends. Now sit down, feel the warmth of the fire, and immerse yourself in the magic of this ancient world. Today I'm going to tell you a story that will take you back to the golden age of epics, and at the same time fill you with the echoes of war, love, and betrayal. This is a story in which not only heroes, but even the gods themselves struggle with fate. This is the story of the Trojan War. But this is not just the story of a war, but a timeless echo of legends, passions, and imagination. Now close your eyes and imagine a magnificent city surrounded by high walls, rows and rows of Greek warships sailing over the horizon, and gods playing in the sky. This is how the ancient story of Troy begins. But aren't you curious about how the Trojan War began? Who were Paris, Helena, and Menelaus? Why did the gods intervene in this war, and how was the spark ignited? My friends, now I'm going to take you back to ancient times, to the time when the Greek epics were born. If you are ready, our story begins. My friends, we will now travel back in time for a moment, a time when word was mightier than writing, when the names of heroes spread from tongue to tongue. If we want to understand the story of the Trojan War, we must first get to know the bearer of this legend, Homer. This is where the fabric of our story begins. Homer, the wise narrator of epics, the bard whose voice has stood the test of time. Homer told us a story that goes back much further than his time. The epic he called Iliad is the echo, not only of a war, but of the spirit of an age. So who was this Homer? Some portray him as a blind bard. Others say he was not a person, but a tradition. But the truth is that his words live on even today. The Iliad, with its 24 chapters with words woven like embroidery, reveals the mythological origins of the Trojan War. In this epic, there are not only battles, but also the intrigues of the gods, the passions of men, and the inevitable power of fate. The Trojan War is not an ordinary conflict, but a pitched battle in which the order of the universe is tested. Zeus's thunderbolts light up the sky, while Aphrodite's touch ignites hearts. While Apollo's arrows bring death, Hera's anger shakes the entire divine order. Homer tells the story of these gods and men so skillfully that every word creates an echo in the ears and a tremor in the hearts. But the real magic of the epic, my friends, is in how the road to war is paved with stones. How can an apple start an entire war? Why did Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera engage in a beauty contest? How did a young prince named Paris pull the webs of fate so skillfully? Homer's words both make us ask these questions and skillfully hide their answers. That is why the Iliad is not only an epic, but also a riddle. So, my friends, are only gods and heroes at the origin of this legend? Or is there a shadow of historical truth lurking behind the Trojan War? I will tell you in the next chapter, where we will pursue this question as we step into the ancient lands of Troy. Are you ready? Then be patient, because the secrets hidden behind the walls of Troy are waiting for us. My dear friends, to understand the Trojan War, we need to listen not only to men, but also to the gods. This war started with a game played by the gods rather than by human hands. Using the heroes on the battlefield as pawns, these immortals held the strings of fate in their hands with their own ambitions, jealousies, and passions. Now I will tell you how the first piece of that game was played, the golden diamond of Eris and the fate of Paris. Eris? My friends, who is Eris, the goddess of turmoil and discord? When she is not invited to a sumptuous wedding on Olympus, her wounded pride takes revenge in such a way that it opens the door to events that will change not only the world of the gods, but also humanity forever. Eris is absent from the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the goddess of the sea, but she stirs the whole of Olympus with a small gift she leaves on the table, a golden apple. Only 3 words are written on it: to the most beautiful. And that's when everything happens. Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera, the magnificent goddesses of Olympus, claim the apple as their own. These 3 powerful goddesses are as famous for their pride as they are for their beauty. But Zeus does not want to be the arbiter of this confusion. Oh, wise Zeus! Perhaps he could see where this was going. So he leaves the decision to Paris, the son of the king of Troy. Paris, a young man played by fate. Once living the simple life of a shepherd, he is suddenly summoned to the greatest game of the gods. Now imagine, my friends, 3 goddesses standing in front of young Paris, each trying to win him over to their side. Hera promises him power and a kingdom. Athene offers eternal knowledge and victory in battle. Aphrodite promises the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Who will this young shepherd believe? Who will he submit to? Paris's heart beats for the love Aphrodite promises. With Aphrodite's help, he kidnaps Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, to Troy. This act changes forever the fate not only of 2 people, but also of 2 nations. But my friends, I ask you, did Paris really decide of his own free will, or had the gods already determined his choices? What would be the price of the love promised by Aphrodite? As the shadow of war grows behind the walls of Troy, how would the other pieces in this game of the gods move? Now I will tell the story of Troy and Helen's fate as it drifts towards war, but take your time, for the greatest stories deserve to be listened to patiently. My dear listeners, I will now tell you how a young man, Paris, was dragged into the game of the gods and fate. This story goes far beyond a beauty contest. It sheds light on a time when ambition, passion, and jealousy were intertwined. Imagine that the peaceful life of an ordinary shepherd becomes the scene of a contest between the mightiest goddesses of Olympus. But where it all begins, Paris is not a hero but a mere youth. Let's get to know Paris. He is the son of Priamos, king of Troy. A dark prophecy was attached to his birth. Paris would one day cause the destruction of Troy. Fearing this prophecy, his parents abandoned him in the mountains to be raised as a shepherd. But fate does not give up on him easily. This conflict between the gods will engrave his name in history. Now let's leave Paris's simple shepherd life aside and climb to the summit of Olympus. Eris's golden diamond inscribed, to the most beautiful has caused a great debate among the goddesses. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, Hera, the protector of marriage and kingship, Athena, the master of wisdom and the art of war. Each argues that the diamond belongs to her, but Zeus refuses to make this difficult decision. For, my dear friends, taking sides between the gods would cause storms not only on earth but also in the sky. With Zeus's wisdom, they go to Paris, where a young shepherd will shoulder this enormous responsibility. Imagine for a moment, 3 magnificent goddesses stand before Paris. Each of them claims the apple as their rightful possession. Paris is only a man, and how can he not be overwhelmed by the majesty of the gods? Nevertheless, the goddesses make promises to tempt Paris. Hera offers to be the most powerful ruler in the world. She offers the kingdom of kingdoms and might. Athena promises wisdom and the secret of invisibility in battle. And Aphrodite, oh Aphrodite, she offers love that captivates the human soul. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, will belong to Paris. Which is the greater prize, my dear friends? Power, wisdom, or love? Paris' heart beats at Aphrodite's words. Perhaps in the passion of his youth, perhaps under the spell of love, he hands the golden apple to Aphrodite. That moment is not just a choice. At that moment, history is made. Aphrodite keeps her promise and gives Paris Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. But Helen is the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. And this kidnapping will turn into not just a love story, but a nation's struggle for honor. What happens now, my dear friends, as Paris and Helen, burning with the flames of love, seek refuge within the walls of Troy? How will the reverberations of this event be felt in the Greek lands? Will the war take place only in the world of men? Or will the gods also be a part of this conflict? Our next story will give you the answers to these questions. Stay tuned. My dear friends, I will now tell you how one woman's beauty started a war. But this is not just a love story. This is a story of passion, ambition, and honor etched in history. When the gods forced Paris to make his choice, it was not just the decision of a young shepherd, but a turning point that changed the fate of all humanity. In that moment, when Paris handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, the fate of Helena was sealed. Helena, a unique woman whose beauty is legendary. But is this beauty a blessing or a curse? What has been written about her is full of legends that travel from tongue to tongue. In Homer's words, Helena is described in such a way that she resembles a goddess in human eyes. Her beauty lies not only in her body, but also in her posture, her voice, the depth of her eyes. But Helena was the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta and queen of his kingdom. Her peaceful life was turned upside down by the spark of love that fell into Paris's heart. So, dear listeners, how did Paris and Helena meet? As Aphrodite promised, fate brought them together. When Paris arrived in Sparta, on his way from Troy, he was welcomed with great hospitality by Menelaus. At the time, hospitality was a sacred custom in the Greek world, practiced to gain the favor of the gods. As Paris was welcomed into Menelaus's palace, he encountered the ravishing beauty of Helena. Their gaze was powerful enough to change the course of history. Having won Helena's heart, Paris made a plan to return to Troy with her. But this should not be seen as just the escape of two lovers. Helena was the queen of Sparta, the pride of Menelaus. Her loss meant stealing not only a man's lover, but the honor of a nation. Paris and Helena's escape ignited Menelaus's rage. This anger was the harbinger of a storm that would affect not only Paris, but Troy and even the entire Greek world. While Helena and Paris had found refuge behind the walls of Troy, Menelaus could not accept this insult. As a dishonored king, with the support of his brother Agamemnon, he called the other Greek kings to war, uniting to bring back the queen of Sparta and punish Troy. This force formed one of the largest armies history had ever seen. But this was not just a preparation for war. It was the first steps of an epic in which gods and heroes intertwine. My dear friends, the love of Paris and Helena was so strong that it could defy the honor of a nation. But the consequences of this love would change the lives of thousands of people, not just the lovers. So what kind of a story will this army that comes together at the call of Menelaus open the door to? What role will the heroes waiting behind the walls of Troy play in this war? In the next episode, we will meet the heroes of this great war and witness their immortal epic. Stay tuned. My dear friends, we are now on the brink of a moment that will change the course of history. The love of Paris and Helena would determine not only the fate of a man and a woman, but the future of two great civilizations. The anger of Menelaus, king of Sparta, and his desire to regain his honor had turned into an unprecedented call for unity in the Achaean world. But this was no easy task. The Greek world of that time was made up of rival city-states: Athens, Sparta, Mycenae, Ithaca. Each of these cities lived for their own interests and their own pride. But that's where Agamemnon, Menelaus' brother, came in. Agamemnon, the mighty king, whose name still echoes in the pages of history. Ruler of Mycenae, one of the richest and most powerful leaders of the Greek world. But Agamemnon's power was shaped not only by his wealth, but also by his charisma and leadership skills. Rushing to Menelaus' side, this ambitious king forged a new social contract, an agreement that basically said that those who stole for the Greeks would pay a ransom for the honor of his family. But for the common honor of all Greeks, Agamemnon's dream was not only to bring Helena back, but also to make history by uniting the Greek world. But dear listeners, how could this unity be achieved? Think of the rivalries between the Greek city-states at that time. Bringing together the leaders of these cities, who were always on guard against each other, and gathering a huge army was almost impossible without the help of even the gods. Agamemnon set out to accomplish this difficult task. He sent envoys to each king, to each leader. Sparta's shame was everyone's shame. Paris's insult was not just against Menelaus, but against the entire Greek world. And this shame could only be answered with the sword. So warriors were summoned from all over the Achaean world. Initially skeptical, the kings heeded Agamemnon's call, mesmerized by the beauty of Helena and the wealth of Troy. But dear friends, this army was not just made up of ordinary soldiers. It was a gathering of the ordinary soldiers of legend. Achilles, the demigod hero, Odysseus, the leader whose intelligence earned the respect of even the gods, Ajax, the giant warrior known for his strength and courage, Each of them would play a leading role in the writing of this epic. But dear listeners, it was not easy to bring these heroes together. For example, Achilles, the son of the sea goddess Thetis. This young warrior had already learned his destiny. Legends say that Achilles had two paths before him: to live a quiet and peaceful life and be forgotten, or to die young and gain immortal fame. His mother had disguised him as a woman to protect him from this war. However, thanks to Odysseus's cleverness, Achilles could not hide this trick and had to join the battle. Just like that, every hero had a story, every story had a reason. Laugh and laugh and laugh. In the end, Agamemnon managed to gather the army he wanted. Thousands of warriors gathered in ships in the harbor of Aulis. But this huge army needed the gods' permission to set sail. The winds were calm, the seas calm. The gods would set their own conditions to start the war. And right here, a tragic story that goes all the way back to Agamemnon's own family awaits us. So, dear friends, what sacrifice would Agamemnon have to make to get this army on the road? What price would the gods demand for starting this war? In the next chapter, we will witness the beginning of this arduous journey and the negotiations with the gods. Stay tuned. Hey, my dear friends. We are now moving towards the shadow of the unique walls of Troy, the city that rose at the dawn of the Golden Ages, the subject of epics. This city was not just stones and walls. It was the pride of a civilization, the defense of a people, and the destiny of a hero. The walls of Troy were as strong and durable as if they had come from the hands of the gods. It is said that Laomedon built this enormous structure with the help of Apollo and Poseidon, master architects descended from Zeus. By the time Priamos ascended to the throne, these walls had transformed Troy from a defenseless city into an invincible fortress. However, no matter how strong the walls of a city, without the hearts to defend it, it would be just a pile of stones. Do you know who the greatest of those hearts defending Troy was? Hector. Oh, Hector, the pride of Priamos, the hero of the Trojan people and a warrior known for his justice. In the mythological chaos of the Trojan War, Hector rose as the greatest hope of his people and the greatest fear of his enemies. He was not only a warrior, but also a husband, a father, and a brother. Hector, I'm going to see you in person. All I have to do is assign my address and name my firm, if it weren't by extension matter. He gave up the ring of the gods. He was the best of intelligence, wits, and grace. Hector's heroism struck fear into the hearts of the Achaeans, while the Trojans' love and trust in him grew with each passing day. But, my dear friends, we cannot fully comprehend Hector's greatness without understanding the responsibility behind his courage. Under Priamos's reign, Troy was a gateway between East and West, thanks to its wealth and strategic location. The city was not only a crossroads of trade routes, but also of gods and destiny. Troy's gold-covered treasures were so vast that even the kings of the time were dazzled. But this wealth was also the city's curse. The Achaean War was not only for Helena, but for Troy's gold and strategic position. It was in such an environment that Hector took up his sword to protect both his people and his family. Hector's heroic story was inseparable from the mighty walls of Troy. Looking down on his enemies from the top of those walls, Hector fought not only with his sword but also with his intelligence. As he organized the defense of Troy, he put a piece of his heart into every corner of the city. Under his leadership, the people of Troy stuck together and resisted the Achaeans tirelessly. But Hector's courage shone not only on the battlefield, but also in his love for his family. His devotion to his wife Andromache and his son Astyanax showed his human side at odds with the brutal nature of war. But dear friends, it was not only Hector's heroism that made Troy so strong. Priamos's kingship was also an epic in this city. Priamos was the wise old king of Troy, a leader respected even by the gods. Under his rule, Troy became not just a city but a symbol of civilization. But every kingdom has a test, and Priamos's test would be one of the greatest tragedies of this epic. In this part of the Trojan War, the resistance of the people united behind the walls and the heroism of Hector are written in golden letters in the history books. But this great story does not end here, dear friends. Hector's fate seems to be written in the hands of the gods. But could this brave warrior survive against a demigod like Achilles? Was Hector's sword stronger, or the bitter end fate had in store for him? In the next installment, I will tell you about the epic encounter between Hector and Achilles and how the walls of Troy were shaken by the battle. Stay tuned. Ah, my dear friends, as the dark curtain of the Trojan War is lifted, tougher, more brutal days come to the stage. A war shaped not only by swords and shields, but by pride, anger, and the gods. I will now take you through perhaps the most fiery years of this epic. The first clashes of the Achaeans, the inexhaustible ambition of the armies, and the rage of one man, Achilles, that would change the whole story of the early years of the war. Were a time when things did not go quite as they had planned for the Achaeans. Against the walls of Troy, it was as if the Achaeans had literally hit a fortress wall. The united army of the Greek city-states, no matter how strong it was on the battlefield, was far from advancing against the determination of the Trojans and Hector. And even within this huge army, there was no shortage of conflict and disagreement because, my friends, a war is won or lost not only by the enemy, but sometimes also by the disagreements within the army. Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief of the Achaeans, insisted on holding the lead, but his ambition and arrogance caused him to cross paths with one of his greatest warriors, Achilles. Achilles. Ah, remember this name, dear friends. The greatest hero of Greek mythology, the son of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. According to legend, his mother dipped him in the river Styx as soon as he was born, to bless him with immortality. But because she dipped him by his heel into the holy water, that small part of his body remained mortal. That is why that weakness, called the heel of Achilles, sealed his fate. However, as a warrior, no one could match him. His sword and courage struck fear into the hearts of even his enemies. But alas, dear friends, Achilles' courage and strength were not greater than his anger and pride. Agamemnon's leadership overshadowed Achilles' superiority on the battlefield. Instead of uniting their armies against Troy, this conflict between the two giants weakened them. This conflict completely changed the course of the war. So, how did this fight start? At the center of it all was a spoil of war. Precisely when Agamemnon took away this prize, the apple of Achilles' eye, Achilles' anger flared. Achilles no longer recognized Agamemnon's authority and refused to fight. Achilles' withdrawal from the battle was a great loss for the Achaeans. He was not only a warrior, but a source of morale. In his absence, the Trojan armies were emboldened and increased the pressure on the Achaeans. The Trojan forces, led by Hector, began to push the Achaeans back, even to the point of burning their ships. This prompted Agamemnon to set aside his ambition and call Achilles back into battle. But dear friends, once broken pride is never easy to mend. Achilles rejected Agamemnon's apology and the gifts he offered. His anger was so great that it interfered not only on the battlefield but even with the gods. This conflict resonated even among the gods. Thetis, seeing that her son had been wronged, begged Zeus, and Zeus allowed Troy to prevail until Achilles' anger subsided. Thus, the war turned into a game board in the hands of the gods. The superiority of the Achaeans in the war was shaken, and the balance of the war had completely changed. While songs of victory echoed within the walls of Troy, hopes among the Achaeans were about to be dashed. So, my dear friends, would Achilles' rage last forever, or would the war give him a reason to pick up his sword again? More importantly, how would Hector's fate be sealed against Achilles' rage? The answers to these questions will form the most memorable moments of the epic. In the next episode, we will discover together where this great conflict between gods and men will lead. Stay tuned. My dear friends, the events of the saga of the Trojan War were not just a struggle between men. No, this war also continued on the high peaks of Olympus, on the glorious thrones of the gods. For the gods have always exerted their power over humans, projecting their own desires and ambitions onto the battlefield. This was such an intervention that sometimes changed the course of destiny, and sometimes opened new doors of hope in the most desperate moments of people. I will now take you to the role of the gods in this great war. In the early years of the Trojan War, there was a divine tension on Mount Olympus. Zeus, king of the gods and absolute ruler of the sky, wanted to appear neutral in the course of the war. But my dear friends, was it possible to remain neutral in such a great war? Even Zeus found it difficult to remain neutral when his own children and brothers and sisters were on one side of the war. Moreover, the endless anger of his wife Hera and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, against Troy made him constantly question his decisions. Hera was one of the most loyal supporters of Troy's enemies. This anger, which started when Paris chose Aphrodite in a beauty contest, made itself felt at every stage of the war. With the authority of being the wife of Zeus, she was constantly trying to turn the balance of power in Olympus in her favor. However, despite all Hera's cunning and influence, Zeus did not always submit to her. Zeus's efforts to distance himself from the gods, who mostly supported the Achaeans in this war, increased Hera's wrath even more. Athena, as the goddess of wisdom and strategy, knew that the war would be won in the mines. She believed that Troy had to be destroyed and harbored great enmity, especially against Hector. Hector's victories in the war disturbed Athena, and she often intervened in the war strategies of the Achaean army and sided with them. She was the first to realize that Achilles should return to the battle against Hector. Athena, as a goddess of wisdom, inspired the Achaeans by recognizing the importance of making the right move at the right time. But the most influential of the gods in this war was Aphrodite. For, dear friends, her interventions were felt not only on the battlefield, but also in the hearts of men. The love of Paris and Helena was Aphrodite's blessing, but also the greatest curse of the war. Aphrodite intervened every time to conceal Paris's weakness on the battlefield and to protect him, sometimes protecting him in his own life, sometimes driving him from the battlefield. However, these interventions created tension both among the Trojans and on Olympus. Artemis and Apollo were the most loyal protectors of Troy. Apollo gave courage to the Trojan army and played a major role in Hector's victories on the battlefield. As the god of archery, Apollo sent deadly plagues on the Achaean army, creating fear and chaos in their ranks. Artemis, as the protector of the women and children of Troy, touched a human dimension of the war. This support from the gods to Troy made the war even more difficult for the Achaeans. When Zeus finally heeded the pleas of Thetis, Clea's mother, the neutrality of the gods disappeared completely. Zeus allowed Troy to gain a temporary upper hand, which in turn cemented Hector's victories. However, this caused a major conflict among the other gods on Olympus. Among the gods, it was clear that this war was not only for the sake of humans, but also as a tool for their own power struggles. At Zeus's behest, the gods sometimes hesitated to intervene on the battlefield, but powerful figures like Hera and Athena never backed down. Ah, my dear friends, these divine interventions turn the fate of the war in a different direction every time. But these interventions also tested the will of men. Hector's courage, Achilles' rage, Agamemnon's ambition, all became part of the gods' games. But how long would this rivalry and games between the gods last? And how long would this return to war affect these divine interventions? The fate hidden behind the walls of Troy would herald the victory of which god? The answers to these questions are hidden in the most exciting moments of the epic. Stay tuned, because our story is just beginning. Ah, my dear friends, I take you now to perhaps one of the most dramatic and unforgettable moments of the Trojan War, to the climax of an epic, to that terrifying encounter where the fates of two heroes intersected. On one side, Achilles, the invincible warrior of the Greek army, whose rage made the sky tremble. And on the other side, Hector, the brightest star of Troy, the hero and hope of his people. These two great names took part not only on the battlefield, but also in one of the greatest tragedies in human history. Let's live this moment together, step by step. Achilles, dear friends, was a man destined for heroism, but his heroism was shaped not by his victories on the battlefield, but by the depth of his anger and pain. The murder of his close friend and comrade Patroclus by Hector had opened a wound in Achilles' soul that was impossible to close. Achilles, who had never approached the walls of Troy until that day, now vowed to destroy not only Hector, but all of Troy. This desire for revenge had turned him into a storm that even the gods of Olympus could not stop. For the people of Troy, Hector was not only a prince, but also a savior. This father Priamos had always seen his son as more of a leader than a warrior. Hector was a source of trust for everyone behind the walls of Troy. But this trust came at a heavy price. From the early years of the war, Hector had carried the fate of Troy on his back with his courage, winning countless victories. But now he faced an opponent like Achilles, burning with revenge. When that unforgettable day came, a hush fell over the walls of Troy. Achilles shone like a god in his golden armor. That armor had been specially forged by the god Hephaestus, at the request of the goddess Thetis. Every detail represented Achilles' power and destiny. When the people looked over the walls of Troy and saw Hector's challenge, they were filled with hope. But, my dear friends, this hope was but a harbinger of impending tragedy. Despite the pleas of his father Priamus and his mother Hecabe, Hector did not retreat inside the walls. His pride and honor demanded that he face Achilles on the battlefield. For him, this was not just a battle, but a struggle for the future of Troy. But fate was not on Hector's side. Achilles' speed and power were impossible to resist. When the two heroes locked eyes, time stood still. This moment, when even the gods held their breath, revealed the purest form of human will. This epic encounter on the battlefield was heading towards its inevitable end. Hector responded to Achilles' attacks with courage, but Athena sided with Achilles to seal Hector's fate in this struggle as well. She tricked Hector and broke his last resistance. Hector's armor was the armor that belonged to Achilles, which he had taken from Patroclus, and tragically it was this armor, a reflection of Achilles' anger, that brought Hector's end. When Achilles' spear pierced Hector's chest, the tide of battle turned. But, my dear friends, Achilles' victory was not just a victory in battle. It was the beginning of the fall of a hero. Hector's death, though a disaster for the Trojans, was a heavy burden for Achilles to carry in his soul. Before he died, Hector begged Achilles to return his body to his family, but Achilles' anger would not allow it. He tied Hector's lifeless body to his chariot and dragged it in front of the walls of Troy. This scene shattered the hearts of the Trojans and Priamos. Hector's death went down in history as one of the most tragic scenes not only of the Trojan War but also of human history. Achilles could not quench his anger with this victory. On the contrary, it created a greater emptiness in his soul. With Hector's death, the war became even more bloody and destructive. The fate of Troy was now on a different path. But, dear friends, was this death the end of hope for the people of Troy? Or would Achilles' rage bring about his own end? The answer to all these questions is hidden in the next installment of our story. Stay tuned. My dear friends, at the end of these years of endless skirmishes of the Trojan War, a genius stepped in to change the course of destiny. Odysseus. He would change the course of the war not with the flash of swords and the fury of spears, but with his sharp wit. This was the culmination of human will and ingenuity that even the gods admired. Now, I take you away from the battlefields and into the tent where the greatest Achaean commanders gathered. There the plan was born that would change the war forever. With Achilles' defeat of Hector, Troy's resistance seemed broken, but the faith in Priamus's kingdom remained unshaken. The massive walls of Troy had been impassable to the Greek army for years. Each siege attempt was repulsed by the defenders of Troy, and once again the war came to a standstill. The Greek army was worn out and the patience of the soldiers was exhausted. It was clear that these walls could no longer be breached by an ordinary show of force. It was at this point, my dear friends, that Odysseus' sharp mind came into play. Odysseus was the cunning king of Ithaca. From the first day he joined the war, his genius and strategic insight were evident at every moment. But now, an unprecedented plan was needed to end the war. Instead of using brute force to defeat his enemies, this plan would target their faith and pride. Odysseus's mind was constantly working. One night, in the silence of the war-weary Achaean tents, inspiration haunted him. He had found a way to deceive the Trojans. A gigantic wooden horse, which would both make the Greeks' surrender look like a gift and enable the Trojans to carry it back to their city. But this was only a ruse, because the Achaean warriors hiding inside the horse would sneak behind the walls of Troy and conquer the city from the inside. The idea seemed incredible at first, but Odysseus' determination ensured that the plan was accepted by the Greek commanders. Agamemnon and Menelaus, although convinced that the war would be won by force, realized that Odysseus' proposal held the glimmer of hope. For the plan to work, a gigantic wooden horse had to be built. This horse had to be not only a trick of war, but also an artistic masterpiece. It had to look impressive enough to flatter the Trojans, yet innocent enough to make them proud. As the Greek soldiers began to build the wooden horse, a new excitement filled their battle-weary souls. They worked diligently for days and nights. Under Odysseus' guidance, the horse was built to reflect both a gift and a hidden danger in every detail. The horse was left hollow, and selected Achaean warriors prepared to hide in this secret compartment. When the horse was completed, the Greek army boarded their ships, pretending to leave the shores of Troy. But it was only an illusion. The soldiers retreated to a nearby island to return under cover of night. The battlefield was now silent. The Trojan horse, left alone, looked like a sign of victory for the Trojans. Dear friends, the next morning when the Trojans saw this huge structure standing alone on the beach, they were astonished and curious. The idea quickly spread that the Achaeans had retreated, leaving this horse as a sign of peace. However, not everyone was ready to accept this gift. Laocoon, the wise priest of Troy, warned the people that this might be a trick. However, this warning drew the wrath of the gods. Laocoon and his sons were slaughtered by huge snakes rising from the sea. This event led the Trojans to believe that the horse was indeed a gift from the gods. The horse was carried inside the walls with great enthusiasm. The Trojans celebrated that night with the joy of victory. Believing that the Achaeans had retreated and the war was over, the Trojans celebrated inside the walls with dances and songs, while the Achaean warriors, waiting quietly inside the wooden horse, waited for midnight. At this point, the fate of the war would change in just one night. But dear friends, what challenges would the warriors in the wooden horse face when they infiltrated behind the walls? Was this great trick of Troy the key to victory? Or would it be the beginning of a new tragedy? The answers to these questions are hidden in the rest of our story. Stay tuned. My dear friends, the fire is burning and the screams echoing in the shadow of the legendary walls of Troy tell the story of the fall of a civilization. It is the greatest story of how the will of man, the intervention of the gods, the power of deception can change the course of history. And now, I will tell you about that dark night in Troy, how the Greek ingenuity turned a city to ashes, and the tragedy that followed. Hold on tight, because you are about to witness one of the most dramatic moments in history. That night, Troy was quieter than ever. After the celebrations, the people had fallen asleep, exhausted from the intoxication of victory. As the ancient walls rose defiantly into the night, the Trojans, unaware of the danger hidden within them, were in deep peace. But for the Achaean warriors hiding inside that wooden horse, this silence was the signal to act. Odysseus and the elite warriors waited silently in the dark interior of the wooden horse. With excitement and a little fear in their hearts, they watched for midnight to come. And then, the moment came. As the deepest shroud of darkness covered the night sky, the warriors inside the wooden horse slowly crept out. With silent steps, these brave soldiers made their way to the gates of the city walls. The gates were open, the guards neutralized, and the Greek army poured into the city, disembarking from their ships hidden on the beach. The strong walls of Troy had become both the greatest security and the greatest trap of a people, because inside those walls was the enemy. Dear friends, when the people of Troy realized the attack, it was too late. The Achaeans were pouring into the streets of the city like a flood. The screams of the soldiers, the metallic echo of the guns, and the flames rising from burning houses lit up the dark sky. Troy, once a glorious city of heroic stories, was now a scene of chaos and destruction. Despite Hector's heroic battle and Priamos's steadfast leadership, Troy was now defenseless. The Greek warriors reached Priamos's palace and brutally murdered the old king. Trojan women and children were taken captive, while the men were put to the sword. Even the temple of Athena, said to be the protector of the gods, did not escape this wrath. The city lost forever the splendor it once had. One of the most poignant moments of this destruction was the story of Cassandra. Cursed by Apollo, this young woman had the ability to see the future, but no one believed her prophecies. She saw that the Trojan horse would bring disaster and tried to warn the people, but no one believed her. With the fall of the city, Cassandra once again carried the weight of these prophecies on her back. That night, Cassandra was among the captured Trojans. She could not save the city with her prophecies. She could not escape the cruel chains of fate. The fall of Troy marked the end of not just a city, but a civilization. The city's flames consumed not only the stone walls, but also the past and future of a people. The ancient walls of Troy were now silent, as were the heroes who lay behind them. But, dear friends, there is a question we must ask here. What remains of the ashes of Troy? Did this brutal victory of war exact a price, even for the victors? How long would the triumphal intoxication of the Greek heroes last? And more importantly, who were the real victors of this war? The answers to these questions are hidden in the next stop of our journey. Don't ever leave. Dear friends, we're about to witness one of the most poignant stories of ancient times. This is the story of a life cursed by the wrath of the gods, a life woven with tragedy. As the last days of Troy were filled with flames and screams, one of the most unforgettable faces of that dark scene was undoubtedly Cassandra. Her prophecies echoed like a warning cry in this great epic of history. But unfortunately, these cries were lost in the arrogance and disbelief of the people. Loved by Apollo and blessed by his gifts, Cassandra was seen as a gift from the gods in the heavy days of Troy. Apollo had endowed her with the ability to see the future, but when Cassandra refused to return the gods' love, this great blessing turned into a curse. No one would take her prophecies seriously anymore. Imagine, friends, you can see all the horrors of the future, but you cannot convince your people. What a burden! What an unbearable fate! Cassandra saw clearly that the introduction of the Trojan horse into the city would lead to disaster and warned the people. This horse is not a gift, but a harbinger of destruction, cried the desperate voice echoing through the stone walls of the palace. But his words were lost in the mocking laughter of the courtiers. The curse of the gods had made him a madman in the eyes of his people, and so Cassandra's greatest tragedy began to take shape. Knowing the truth, but never being able to speak it. The people of Troy, drunk with victory, ignored Cassandra's words. While admiring the horse's massive body, they were unaware of the danger within it. That night of celebrations, music and dancing was in fact the last night of the city. And what about Cassandra? She witnessed these celebrations, storming inside herself. In the moments when everyone was singing with happiness, a lament was rising in her heart. Stop and think for a moment, dear friends. You see, you even warn, but no one listens to you. What kind of helplessness is this? The arrogance of men and their blind faith in the gods was leading a people to disaster. Cassandra had heeded the voice of the gods and warned the people, but they failed to see one curse as a harbinger of another. With the fall of Troy, Cassandra's prophecies came true. The city walls were breached, fire engulfed the houses, the people were slaughtered or taken captive. Cassandra stood in the center of this tragedy, in the shadows of the collapsing palace. Her prophecies had become a bloody reality before her eyes. But this was not enough to ease the pain of her fate. Cassandra fell into Agamemnon's hands as the spoils of the Greeks. Even in those moments when the war seemed to be over, Cassandra was heading towards her own dark end. Even as she was carried as a prisoner on Greek ships, her prophecies continued. By Agamemnon's side, Ben's nun had to watch the destruction of her city and her own life. Even as she was carried as a prisoner on Greek ships, her prophecies continued. By Agamemnon's side, she knew that death was near. But again, No one listened to her. They laughed at her warnings. And Cassandra's story is not only a tragedy, but also a story of rebellion. Her desperate warnings show humanity's helplessness before the gods, but also how it is destroyed by its own arrogance. He watched the destruction of a people who would not listen to him and carried the weight of his curse to his last breath. But at this point, dear friends, we need to ask the question, did Cassandra's curse really come from the gods, or was it a reflection of people's own arrogance and blindness? And when fate so cruelly shapes even a sage like Cassandra, what is the lot of ordinary people? We will continue to search for answers to these questions in the mists of history. But remember, this story does not end here. Now it is time for the stories of revenge to rise from the ashes of destruction. Who will fuel the fires of revenge? And what new catastrophes will the echoes of this war bring? Stay tuned and keep watching. Fairy friends, I will now tell you about one of the most poignant and brutal moments of the Trojan War. Not only the fall of a hero, but also the moment when the balance of a war changed forever. In this story, you will witness the fate of a man caught between immortality and a curse. Achilles. Achilles! His very name was enough to inspire fear on the battlefield. His rage gave courage to the Greek armies and terror to the Trojans, shattering the hopes of their enemies. But Achilles had a destiny written from birth. His mother, Thetis, had immersed her son in the sacred waters of the river Styx to make him immortal. But this blessing contained a flaw. Thetis had identified his weakest spot. That immortality was limited to such a fine detail was proof of how cruel and cynical the gods could be. Achilles was seen almost as a god. In his invincibility in battle, his killing of Hector had changed the course of the war and demoralized the Trojans. But in the eyes of both gods and mortals, his victories became a story of arrogance and anger. The prolongation of the war pushed Achilles, like all heroes, to his limits. And in the end, like all heroes, his fall was inevitable. In the shadow of the walls of Troy, there were moments that brought the end of a hero. Paris, yes, that handsome shepherd, the man who sparked this war by bringing Helena to Troy. Paris was too weak to be an opponent for Achilles on the battlefield, but the gods had given him a deadly trump card. With Apollo's guidance, the arrow Paris held in his hands turned into a weapon that carried the hopes of Troy. And then the moment came. The arrow pierced Achilles' weak spot, his heel. Think about it, my friends. A man who was thought to be invincible collapsed with a single arrow. Isn't this a clear sign of what kind of lessons the gods want to teach people? This arrow from the hand of Paris marked the end not only of a hero, but also of the spirit of the Trojan War. Achilles' death was a disaster for the Greek army. Without his anger and power, they didn't feel as strong on the battlefield. The Trojans, on the other hand, began to rekindle their hopes with his death. But we must not forget that the fall of Achilles changed not only the fate of a battle, but also the future of a people and its legend. Even as he collapsed, Achilles was majestic like a god. The Trojans found it hard to believe he was dead, because even if a legend died in body, its story lived on. When the Greeks withdrew Achilles' body from the battle in great mourning, They left behind not only a void, but a deep wound in the balance of the war. Achilles' death marked a turning point towards the end of the war. The loss plunged the Greeks into deep grief and emboldened the Trojans. But after every victory and every loss, the gods had new games and intrigues. While the Trojans rejoiced in their victory, the Greeks were burning with revenge. The death of Achilles, instead of ending this great war, only brought it to a more brutal end. But now, my dear friends, ask yourselves this question: was Achilles' death really the end? Or was it a harbinger of the end of Troy and its people? What direction would the fall of this hero take the war? Don't worry, because in the next episode, we will look for the answers to these questions. The walls of Troy are now heading towards an even more dangerous end. Get ready, because our story is far from over. Dear friends, although it may seem that the war ended with the fall of Troy, in reality, after every war, other wars begin. Sometimes these battles are fought within oneself, sometimes in the scales of justice of the gods. The once majestic walls of Troy were destroyed, and the city went up in flames, but those left behind, winners and losers alike, were doomed to experience their own tragedy. I will now tell you what happened to the heroes after this epic battle, and the stories that emerged from the ashes of Troy. As Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek army, began his journey home after the fall of Troy, he carried not the joy of victory but the heavy curse on his shoulders. Before he left Troy, the man who had led his army over the walls and brought destruction was not a hero in the eyes of the gods, but an arrogant mortal. Thinking he had triumphed, Agamemnon was actually sailing towards his own end. When Agamemnon returned to Argos with the spoils of his victory, it was not only his throne that awaited him, but also the shadow of betrayal. His wife Clytemnestra had never forgotten Agamemnon's sacrifice of their daughter Iphigenia to the gods. Her bitterness during the years of war blended with her desire for revenge, and she hatched a plan, ready to meet her husband. Agamemnon, intoxicated by his victory, failed to see the danger and died in his own home at the hands of his wife and her lover Aegisthus. This story shows, my friends, that even victory is not always an absolute end. Agamemnon won the war as a king, but he lost his life as a man. The gods never cease to exact a price, even in mortal victories. But my friends, the end of the war did not mean rest for Odysseus. On the contrary, his journey after the war became one of the greatest legends of Greek mythology. This brilliant king, who created the Trojan horse plan and turned the war in favor of the Greeks, sailed the seas to be reunited with his home in Ithaca, his wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus. But fate was playing a different game with him. Odysseus' journey home was a series of trials that would last for 10 years. The deceptive songs of the sirens, the fury of the giant Cyclops Polyphemus, the traps of the sorcerer Circe, and his journey to the dark realm of Hades. These were just a few of the tests the gods had set for him. But Odysseus managed to overcome these dangers, one by one, thanks to his intelligence and determination. The story of Odysseus teaches us this, my friends. True victory is not in winning a battle, but in overcoming adversity. His adventures are not only the homecoming of a king, but also a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit. And Troy, once the pearl of the Mediterranean with its majestic walls, this city was now only remembered for its ashes. The fate of the Trojans did not end with the loss of the war, but a new exile had begun for the survivors. Aeneas and a group of Trojans left the city in search of a new homeland. Legends say that Aeneas's fate led to the founding of Rome. The ashes of Troy would become the foundation for the birth of new empires. But my friends, ruins and stories are not all that remain in the aftermath of war. The destruction of Troy is not the destruction of a people, but the beginning of the rebirth of humanity. This fate, written by the gods, has added a new chapter to the story of mortals. And now, at the end of our story, I leave you with a question, dear friends. When the war is over, is it really the end of everything? Or is every victory and every defeat the beginning of a new story? What lessons have the fate of these heroes left us as they set the stage for new games of the gods? Then wait, because our story does not end here. My dear friends, we are coming to the end of another story. But remember, the course of history never truly ends. Just as a river continues to meander, each ending is pregnant with a new beginning. Today we have talked about the epic story of the Trojan War, the triumphs and tragedies of the heroes and the tricks of the gods. But these stories are not just events of the past. They are universal lessons about the trials of the human spirit and the tests of life. Look, my friends, the crumbling walls and ashen streets of Troy symbolized not only the end of a city, but also the end of an era. But the stories that emerged from those ashes resonated in different geographies and in the languages of different peoples. Agamemnon's tragic death, Odysseus's endless journey, Aeneas's Agish being the word for Rome. They have all become part of our history. But what about us? Why do we tell these stories? Why do we remember them over and over again? Because in these stories we see man's deepest fears, his greatest dreams, and his most unforgettable victories. The Trojan War was a story not only of gods and kings, but also of ordinary people. We should not forget the tears of a Trojan mother who survived the war, or the patience of Penelope in Ithaca waiting for Odysseus' return, because these stories tell us what it means to be human. Today we walk together on these stony paths of history. On each stone, at each turn, there was the voice of a people. Fates written by the gods came to life in the hearts of heroes. But my friends, we must not forget that these stories are echoes not only of the ancient world, but also of today and tomorrow. Behind every war there is a glimmer of hope, and in every hero's story lies the strength of humanity. It has been a great honor for me to accompany you on this long and epic journey. I feel as if every scene I describe comes to life in your eyes. Every word finds a new life from the dusty pages of history, from the thundering swords on the battlefields to the melancholy whispers of the waves on the shore of Ithaca. If I have been able to transport you to that magical texture of history in every detail, then I have fulfilled my duty. But my friends, before I bid you farewell, I would like to spark your thoughts with a question. Are these glorious stories of the past just fairy tales that we will listen to and forget? Or should we find the lessons hidden in them and incorporate them into our own lives? Perhaps the stories of gods and heroes offer us a compass to understand the world we live in. Now we say goodbye to meet in the next story, but don't worry, there are many more stories to tell in the deep wells of history. Who knows, maybe in the next installment we will see another side of the games of the gods. Or we will witness the rise of a people from the ashes. So, until the next adventure, stay safe and curious.